When we think about monopolies of the industrial age, we think about oil, we think about steel, we think about railroads. But what if the most powerful monopoly of the 19th century wasn't a physical industry at all? What if it was the news itself? Because controlling information doesn't just shape markets, it shapes reality. By the late 1800s, Americans were deeply suspicious of monopolies. Oil trusts, railroad trusts, steel trusts. Massive corporations were accused of controlling prices, crushing competition, and manipulating politics. But while public attention focused on industrial power, a different form of concentration was quietly emerging. Unlike oil or steel, information flows through networks. And whoever controls those networks controls what people know. Newspapers were the primary source of information for millions of Americans. But most readers assumed each paper gathered its own news. In reality, many newspapers were reading from the exact same source. In the mid-1800s, gathering news was expensive. Reporters had to travel. Messages had to move by telegraph. To save money, newspapers began pooling resources. They created organizations that would collect news once and distribute it to many papers at the same time. These organizations became known as wire services. One of the most powerful wire services was the Associated Press. Founded by a group of newspapers seeking efficiency, the AP quickly grew into a dominant force in American journalism. Instead of hundreds of newspapers sending their own reporters everywhere, they increasingly relied on the AP to provide the news. A central source began feeding information to the entire country. The telegraph transformed news distribution. Messages could now travel across continents in minutes. Wire services controlled these telegraph channels, which meant they controlled what information moved through them. If a story entered the network, it spread rapidly. If it didn't, millions of people might never hear about it. By the late 19th century, major wire services reached agreements with each other. They divided up the world. Certain agencies would control news in specific regions. Others would distribute it elsewhere. Instead of competing everywhere, they coordinated. This created a global system where a small number of organizations gathered much of the world's news. Local newspapers increasingly depended on wire services. Running a full newsroom was expensive. Using wire reports was cheap and efficient. Soon, thousands of newspapers across America were publishing the same reports. Stories written in one office could appear simultaneously in cities across the nation. Imagine information as a river. Millions of readers live downstream. But the news begins upstream, at the source. If you control the headwaters, you control what flows into the river, and what never enters it at all. Most people assume the news tells them what is happening, but in practice, it often determines what people think about. When millions of readers see the same headline on the same day, the same issue suddenly becomes the story of the moment. The press doesn't just report events, it helps decide which events matter. This system created something extraordinary. Millions of people thinking about the same topic. At the exact same moment. The same stories, the same framing, the same language, the same sense of urgency, a synchronized national conversation. But the starting point was not thousands of independent discoveries. It was a handful of centralized sources. The greatest power in journalism is not always what gets published. It's what doesn't. Stories that never appear, questions that never get asked, events that never reach the front page. When news gathering is centralized, silence can spread just as efficiently as information. Wire services presented themselves as neutral, objective, unbiased, and this reputation became their greatest strength. Because information that appears neutral rarely triggers suspicion. If people believe a source is simply reporting facts, they rarely question how those facts were selected. This system didn't require obvious censorship, no dramatic speeches, no visible commands. Instead, influence was built into the structure itself. Control the sources of information, control what enters the conversation, and the public will naturally focus on the topics you provide. The most effective propaganda is often invisible. Because it looks exactly like ordinary news, the technologies have changed. Newspapers gave way to television. Television gave way to digital media. But one question remains constant. Who controls the headwaters of information? Because whoever shapes the flow of news quietly shapes the way society understands the world. And most of the time, we never even notice the current.